All right. Welcome everyone to the podcast. Thank you so much as always for joining me. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today with my wonderful guest. Dr. Amy Robbins is a licensed clinical psychologist, a deeply spiritual person. She has gifts and talents in mediumship and more, and she has really been walking this path of bridging those two modalities, the world of spirit and the world of clinical psychology, and how can they blend together? And that's what we're really going to talk about today. And I can't wait to dive in. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love being back with you. And I love the friendship that we formed over the years of just interviewing each other on each other's podcasts. So
That's
I'm
so
so
good.
happy to be back.
Yeah, right on. And I'm excited to talk about this specific topic that you are so passionate about, which is so divinely timed for 2025. And that is, as you coined it, spiritual health is mental health, right? And I can't even, I'm on a soapbox behind you singing and dancing this idea because I see it so much in the work that I do. And I love that you are seeing that in the more, I'm going to say, general sense of saying the linear work, right? Because there's more of a linear approach to psychology than there is mediumship, right? Mediumship is
Hmm.
it's not accredited, right?
Right.
It's not licensable. But I love that you're seeing that. So if we kind of go back a little bit, when did this start for you? Like, when did you start to see, wait a minute, there's something more than just clinical going on?
I think that Dr. Lisa Miller, who wrote The Awakened Brain, and I think The Spiritual Child is her other book. I feel like her work has really been informing my work. And I interviewed her at the Mental Health America, which is the largest non-for-profit for mental health group, invited me this year to their conference to interview her. And one of the pillars that they're really looking at building out is spiritual health. And the head of the organization, the CEO, who has now become a dear friend as we've started talking about this, she's a podcast listener. She found me through the podcast, reached out to me blindly, and was like, I feel like this is kind of the next frontier of where we're
Mm,
headed. And, in that talk that I did in Washington, I think it was like in September, I sat down to write my intro to the speech the night before, to the talk the night before, and it literally came through me. And it was so clear how I communicate. I mean, I was taking terms from Lisa's book and beautifully rolling them together. And then um even when I went back to look through her book after I had done the talk, there were things that I had written about and that I spoke on that were things that she had said in the book. I had no memory of them. She talked about psychology and spiritually being two sides of the same coin. I said the exact same thing in my speech without again, I read the book, but I read the book like 2.5 years ago. So we could
mhm,
argue, or maybe even longer, that maybe there was something somewhere in my memory that brought that forth, but it didn't feel that way. It really felt like there was like divine intervention, guides, my higher self, whatever you want to say, came through and like wrote that speech for me in like 3 seconds.
mhm,
And I didn't edit any of it. It was like perfectly communicated. And when I left that weekend, I was like, this is the direction. It was clear as day to me. Spiritual health is mental health. Psychology, in many ways, has lost its soul. It's become a manualized treatment for many people where they come in, they have their 15 sessions, they do their cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm not, there are many treatment modalities that are very helpful for people. This is not to minimize that or discount that. But I think we have lost the spirit of what it means to be a human, a spiritual being having a human experience in all of this. And it just was so clear to me that this is where, for me in 2025, the work needs to be, is integrating spiritual health as a pillar. This is what Schroeder, my friend at Mental Health America, talks about. This is what Lisa Miller talks about, that this is beyond just something that's a side uh, like a side thing that should be focused on. It should be at the forefront of so much of the work we're doing, because I think so much of what we're seeing in society is really um, a disintegration of the spirituality, a disintegration of the belief that what I do affects not only me, but it affects you, that we
Mm-hmm.
are deeply connected, that the work that I do to heal myself helps heal other people, that the work that the connections that we have with one another matter, they ripple out, and that when we continue to see ourselves just as individuals in this world, we are losing touch with our humanity and the humanity of other people. And we see it. We see all these systems around us just crumbling as a result. And for me, it feels exciting. It feels exhilarating, because it's like the systems need to crumble and break down in order for new things to emerge and be built and to grow. And I know a lot of people are kind of entering 2025, especially here in the States. And I don't want this to be a political conversation, but like with trepidation. And I feel like I have so much excitement for what could possibly be created out of what feels like a complete disconnection and breakdown to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
That is, that's so well said. And I can feel the passion you have behind it, like the purpose behind you is completely lit, right? Like
Yes.
you are so in flow, and that the writing of that speech was like the ignition of that flame. You can feel it. It's so aligned. And it's interesting, as we were talking about before, I had a conversation recently with two beautiful astrologists, and they were talking about a certain planet, which I cannot remember right now. And if they're listening, they're going to be laughing because they know exactly what it is. But there's a certain planet in 2025, in the first half of 2025, that when it moves into the next sign, it is all about spirituality being at the forefront and us finding ourselves in spirituality. And so I think it's just so beautiful, your alignment with what's happening in the stars. Because
Hmm.
then it's that as above, so below, that energy, it is ready for this. Like the frequencies, the timing of where we are in the universe, the movement through, and what you're bringing to the forefront, the world is essentially ready for this, to
Yeah.
bridge this.
Yeah, and it really feels that way. You know, you and I were talking for a few minutes before about how information comes to each of us differently. And I often will hear, and this was something I heard very clearly, like spiritual health is mental health. That is the new frontier. That is the space you need to be stepping into. And it was like suddenly, you know, when we talk about being in alignment, it was like suddenly everything fell into place. Even this course that I had been in my mind kind of mulling over for a really long time for clinicians, because I get a lot of clinicians that reach out to me from the podcast and they say, you know, I really want to incorporate this, or I have a patient who's brought in that they went to a medium and I don't know what to do and how to deal with it. And, you know, is it something that we want to encourage or not encourage? All of this is been kind of swimming in my mind. And I've been trying to muscle my way into what this would look like. And then it was like suddenly it just appeared. It was just like one night I got out of the shower and clear as day, every single module that needed to be addressed just came to me. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know, I don't necessarily have when I talk about like my own kind of connection, sometimes I feel frustrated that it doesn't feel like it looks like it sounds like it is to other people, and yet it's still how I get my guidance. If that, I don't know if I made that clear. Um,
No, it makes sense. Like, because we all do receive messages differently, right? Some are extremely clairvoyant, where they see the imageries or the spirit or whatever. Some hear it audibly. Some hear it in their mind, though, and it sounds like their own voice, but it's not their voice. It's these divine knowings, right? It's
right.
sometimes we get impressions of something, right? But it's all of the ways in which spirit can communicate through. And I love that they also are very ready to come through and be in partnership with this movement forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? Embracing also the understandings in psychology, because it's not about dismissing everything, that has been learned in psychology. But I love how you said it's like it's lost its spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lost the human piece of it. When people say like, what is my treatment modality? I have a framework from which I work, but I really do feel like so much of what heals my patients is that I love them. Like I really genuinely love my work with them. I love them. I love them as people. I love the highs and the lows. I love what they struggle with, not because it's like I'm like happy to see them struggle, but like I love seeing people grapple with what it means to be human.
Mm,
And that I think is spiritual. Like that is
yeah.
spirituality is like, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to have highs and lows? And, we were talking about everything that you've went through and like the messages you've received and how that has shaped and transformed and shifted how you think about things. Like I get to have these amazing, intimate conversations with people for my job. And I
Mhm,
get to see them really grapple with life's biggest questions.
mhm. That's amazing. And I think too, like how valuable, like, okay, what am I know what I'm trying to say here. So sometimes I find in my end of things, so more the spiritual, like mediumship side, oftentimes, not often, but when I'm talking to people sometimes, and myself even, I have wanted to spiritually bypass a very human thing. And it's something
Mm-hmm.
I've had to learn to not do because there's so much to getting into the grit of the human part, which is why I love that's where the psychology comes in, like the tools, the tools of helping you think differently or change your framework that are not just spiritually based, as in like, everything happens for a reason. It's like, well, okay, sure it does, but I'm also having a very physical reaction to this trigger emotionally, and how do I deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I can't just spiritually bypass that because the human part of me is going to keep getting hung up on this trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And how I look at it too is I think it can feel really dismissive for people to use a lot of kind of the spiritual language around these experiences, right? Like there's a reason for everything. Everything is divine timing. This was part of your soul contract. You can believe those things, the spiritual side of you, but the human side of you can really come up against, and understandably so, like that can feel really dismissive for people when they're in the throes of some sort of crisis, some sort of suffering and pain and struggle. And so I think that it is an invitation into, rather than like, there's a reason for this, it's how can I continue to learn and grow from this? That's like a small little shift in the language around it, but it still speaks to the soul's work, the spirituality and the work of the soul and the human experience, right? It's not to dismiss and minimize, but the work of therapy, I don't think, is also to just stay in the muck of like the shittiness of life all the time, right? Like life is really
Mm,
hard. And it's about how we use these experiences that are really challenging and rise beyond them, but you have to also move through them. And so it's a both and. And I do think a lot of people, I mean, we could talk about mediumship for grief. Like a lot of people can almost get addicted to having a medium and connecting to their loved ones through that.
yeah.
And so they bypass the part of what it means to be a human being and have lost someone close to you that you love.
Mhm.
And that could be an opportunity for your soul to keep growing, as painful as that is. And it is excruciatingly painful. And it's part of what we have to do. You could say, well, your soul contracted that. And so, there was nothing you could do about it, and your loved one was going to die and just accept it. Or your soul might have contracted that, and it's really hard and it doesn't feel good, and you have to do the work of moving through that in order to grow both your soul and your human experience. You have to experience the intense feelings of being a human being, because again, if we go back to what it means to be human, you chose to be here. right? If this is our belief system, you made a choice to come into this body, to inhabit this body here and now in this time and space. And we could probably have a whole conversation about time and space, right?
Right.
But that you there is opportunities for growth. And we don't have to say like you brought this on or you contracted this, but rather like where is there an opportunity here for me to learn and grow? And that learning and growing often comes from pain.
Yeah. Gosh, isn't that so true? It's so true. I remember I had an astrologer read my chart years ago. I think like 15, at least 15, 20 years ago, maybe. And I remember there was something in my chart that she's like, "Oh, you came here to learn a lot through pain." And I remember thinking like, "What?"
What did I
Like
bargain for here?
I know. I was like, "Can I get a rewrite on that maybe?"
Right,
And
right.
she's like, "No, but like your journey is to experience things through pain." And in many ways that has been accurate. Um, but it is so much a part of the human experience, right? Like pain is one of our identifiers or like a boundary or a benchmark, I think would be the word. Like when we hit a pain point that reaches so deep inside us, we can't help but stop and have to reassess where are we in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think
Mm-hmm.
fear would be another one. Fear would be really close to that, but it's interesting how that's so tightly wound into the human experience.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Mhm.
and our relationship with pain, right? Over the course of a lifetime, people who really over identify with their pain and then it becomes suffering, versus accepting pain and not trying to resist what is. And
So
there's
let's,
go ahead.
yeah, no, let's go into that for a minute because I think that'd be so valuable for people. So, with not resisting the pain and going into it, what does that kind of look like?
So I think I'm trying to come up with like a good example of this. Well, let's use the mediumship grief um loss example. It can be really easy to, again, with mediumship, just go to your medium and talk to your loved one and um act as if they are still here. And they are, but in a different form, and your relationship with them changes, and um, all of those things are true. And it's very painful to step into loss in that way, to acknowledge the depth of connection, pain, maybe disconnection. Maybe it wasn't a good relationship, and there's a lot of feelings and sadness and um, intensity of grief around a relationship that didn't look the way you wanted it to, or and so I think there is a tendency, because it's uncomfortable, to avoid.
Mm.
And in therapy, what I often encourage people to do is to step into and describe and stay with that feeling, whether it's in their physical body, whether it's just a feeling that they can emotionally connect with and address, but that there is an experience of like just sitting with that when the emotion comes up or the sadness comes up, rather than trying to back away or minimize. I led this retreat this year, and one of the things that my friend reflected to me, who, it's very rare that I have other people who are watching me do my work, right? Because I work very
Right.
privately. And so this was a really like unique and new and a bit uncomfortable experience for me. But what she reflected was, one of the things that she saw me do was just not jump in and try to placate someone when they were in whatever process they were in, when they were working through something, but to sit with and hold. People talk a lot about holding space, but like, what does that actually look like? And I think what it looks like is to be with someone else in their process without needing to do something to make it better.
Mm.
And that just being with them in that process, sitting with someone in their whatever it is, pain, sadness, anxiety, fear, worry, and allowing that feeling to come up and out without feeling like you have to do something about it or say the right thing that's going to make it better when oftentimes there are not right things that can make that pain go away. It's just, it's painful. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like I'm dealing with it every day my daughter comes home right now. I feel like I'm dealing with it as she's like managing anxiety around getting ready to go to college. And it's
Mhm.
there's I mean, we're in this big waiting period where she doesn't know. And there's nothing that I can do. I mean, it really is like it's a huge um reminder of like the how much control we don't have. And this, I'm just using this because it's a very concrete, easy situation to kind of
Yeah.
use an example from. But there's not anything that I'm probably ever going to say that's going to make her feel better until she knows, right? Until she has a
Yes.
sense of like what this is going to look like. And so for right now, it's just about sitting with her as she works through the pain of what it feels like to not know, to be anxious, to be scared, to be worried, and not jump in and say, "Oh, it's all going to work." Everybody keeps saying to me, "Oh, it's all going to work out. It's going to work out." And it's like, "Okay, I know that. I'm, 47 years old, but you're all of our 18-year-old selves never believe that anything is going to work out." So,
Yeah.
that just minimizes and shuts down people's experiences rather than allowing people to really just feel what it is they feel
Mhm.
and know and trust. And obviously I've done this work for almost 20, more than 20 years. But I trust that people move through that pain because I've seen it so often. I
Mhm.
get that for the, run for the average person who doesn't do this work, we all want to alleviate pain because we don't like seeing other people in pain. It's uncomfortable
Yeah.
for us to see someone else in pain.
That's such a good point. It is such a good point. And just that holding space for somebody is sometimes the very best thing we could do
Hmm.
in those moments.
Yeah, and really, really powerful. It's just allowing that space to
Mhm.
breathe, right? It's like a wine, right? You pour wine in a decanter to give it the space to become its best version of itself.
Mhm.
And that's how I think a lot about this work and a lot about pain. It's like I can give people the space to get in touch with their pain, to not, I always say to people too, like in my practice, this is we're gonna allow it in. Like it's like a hotel guest. Like they could come in for a couple of days, but it doesn't get to take up residence.
Mm, mhm.
And so we gotta move it through because otherwise those feelings of those kind of more heavy, lower vibrational feelings can take up residence. And when they
Right.
do, that's when it depletes us.
That's such a good way to explain it. Such a good way to explain it. So, going in a slightly different direction, in this spiritual health is mental health direction that you're going in, do you think there is space within that construct for like talking about astrology or numerology or near death experience, mediumship? Like, do those things all fit in there?
Absolutely. I think absolutely, because that's where people are. And if we're talking about meeting people where they are, there are many, many people seeking these treatment modalities, seeking astrology, seeking numerology, seeking mediumship experiences. And my question is always, okay, so now what? I'm like this, so now what? This is why I didn't want to just do straight medium readings. It's because, okay, so you had an amazing medium reading. What do you do with that information? And
Yeah.
that's why I really see this intersection coming together. It's like, let's work together. You do a medium reading. I'm the therapist. How could we maybe even collaborate to help that person? Like, okay, tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing where they're maybe stuck, or here's what I'm experiencing in the therapy work. Like, I'm thinking it's happening around this age. Like, what do you see? Or do you see a past life connected to this? Or like, I think that we could really come together and do amazing work we collaborated. But I think so many people in the clinical space see this as woo or not scientifically proven, or we
Right.
shouldn't be using it. And I would say, even if you don't believe it as a clinician, you don't think mediumship is real, meet your client. You could meet someone where they are in, if they went for a reading, and be
Mhm.
curious about it. What happened? What did you learn? What did your loved ones say? What information did the medium give you? What information did the astrologer give you? Because I think too, like a lot of people have these, like an astrology, for example, they have a reading. The reading says, I'm like you. It seems like astrology doesn't like stick for me for
I know.
whatever reason.
I know.
I listen to it and I'm like, that sounds amazing. And then I'm like, I don't know. My Saturn is in Chiron. What does that even
Yeah.
mean? Um, but that there is an opportunity, rather than saying, oh, well, because this is my astrology, this is just the way that I am. Well, that's really choice. That's kind of saying there's no free will. Like, it's
Mhm.
just, you're just going to accept that this happened to you because it did. No, like, what can we think about? What could we do to shift some of these things? We know that this might be how you were, because of how the stars were aligned when you were born. This is how you are. But that's not a, that to me isn't a recipe to just say, oh, oh, this is how I am. It's an
Mhm.
invitation. It should be an invitation to look at, okay, where are there areas where I might be able to shift and change?
Yeah. I
How
love
can I
that.
prepare for what's coming? Like you said, about whatever planet is going to be
Yeah,
in
I know. I wish I
wherever it's
could
going to
remember it.
be. I'm sure someone will comment and be like, it's supposed to be
Yeah.
here. That there is then an opportunity for us to say, okay, how are we preparing for this? And I do think you do this a lot when you do your energy readings and your energy updates. It's like, okay, what are you doing as a human being to prepare for this
Mhm.
spiritual experience?
Right. Yeah, because I know too, like with any big spiritual awakening experiences too, like there's always this integration that has to come after. And even after a mediumship reading, I love that you're like, so now what? Because it's so true. Like you were given the information, but then how are you going to integrate that?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea of integrating it with very like concrete human principles as well as the spiritual knowledge or spiritual practices also, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
using um, cognitive tools as well as your meditative practice, right? As an example.
Right. And I love you use the word integration, which is like the perfect word, because that is exactly how I think of it. Is, psychedelics have become obviously more in the zeitgeist, and lots of people are talking about their psychedelic experiences. And again, that's integration is an integral part of these experiences. It's not the experience in and of itself can be amazing. But what do you do? What do you do with it afterwards? If you do nothing with it, then that's great. Like, maybe that was enough and you had a really cool experience and you met God and, talked to old ancestors and you were a frog. I don't know. But like,
Mhm.
okay, that's cool. But and if that was your intention behind doing it, then more power to you. But if your intention is to use these tools as a facilitator of healing, then there has to be an ongoing process of healing that happens. And
Mhm.
I think that so often there's not. It's just like, oh my God, I had an amazing medium reading and my loved one is here. And I'm still, in the grips of grief and can't, and I don't believe it. And it's like, okay, well, that's great that you had a great medium reading, but the medium shared with you, I'm sure, more information than just your loved ones here if they were a good medium. And so
Mhm.
what are you going to do? Or people who see
Yeah.
psychics, and then what do they do with that after they see them? What do
Yeah.
how are they really integrating the information that they received?
Yeah. I think that's so on point. And again, because like it doesn't even have to be the negative experiences, and it's even integrating the positive experiences and expansive experiences. And I know even after my NDE, it took me like a year and a bit to integrate even that experience. And that was amazing and blissful
Hmm.
and beautiful and informative. But like to then come back in the human body, it took me a little while to integrate it, and decide what I actually think about it, not just what it was, but like, what do I think about it? And what does that mean for me here now?
Right, right. And that's a big piece that gets missed I think, in a lot of these experiences. And
Mhm.
really, again, like so many people are seeking out these alternative forms of healing, and whether it's energy healing, Reiki, mediumship, numerology, past life regressions, between life soul regressions, all of these experiences that people are seeking, they're seeking for deeper meaning,
Mhm.
right? And so what does that say about like what we are maybe not addressing in therapy? Like, are we not helping people? I mean, there's Irving Yalom, who has written a million therapy books, and in one of his books, I don't remember which one, or maybe it's a book on its own, he talks about like if you never address death in therapy, then it's not actually a real treatment. Like you haven't gotten to the root. And I think what he's talking about is like these existential questions that we have. And I
Mhm.
think where we can get caught in the bypassing of it all is just saying, well, you know, my spirit's going to leave and it's going to come back and none of this matters and it'll just, it is what it is. And
Mhm.
um the soul carries on. Yes, but why are you here? If you
Mhm.
believe, like I believe the soul is here to grow, to learn, and that each incarnation, and you and I were talking before about, what happens when a soul is done with its when it's kind of worked through all its karmic gunk.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a different way of also looking at things. And I think if we as therapists can start to talk about some of that and bring some of that into the therapy room, those are very different conversations. And I do think, and Lisa Miller talks about this, that some of our mental health issues are a result of not listening to our soul, and and our health issues, right? Like so many of our health issues are disease has resided in our bodies when we aren't aligned. I'm not saying all of it. I'm not saying that's like the answer to everything. I do think that there are always multiple factors involved.
Yeah.
But when we know, you and I probably both know lots of people who y- you aren't surprised when they have a chronic disease because you've watched them not care for themselves in whatever way, whether
Mhm.
it's a relationship that they know they shouldn't be in and they convince themselves to stay, whether it's a job they hate, whether it's the way that they treat their body physically through
Right.
substances, and you're like, it does often feel to me like at the core is just like the soul just feels misaligned.
Mhm. That's such a good point. Such a neat way of saying it. So it brings me to wonder, as you've been, preparing your 2025 with this new modality, new take on psychology, and you've been sort of testing the waters with other people. What is the reaction out there from, say, other clinicians and stuff? Because I know I've had an experience, just a super quick story. One time I went to go see a therapist, and in the session, actually, I don't know if I've shared this, but in the session, his father showed up in spirit.
Mm,
And he actually started to cry and then was like, I don't know why I'm crying. I'm so sorry. And he felt unprofessional. And I was like, remember when I told you I was a medium? There's actually a man behind you. He's talking about this and da da da, and did like this little reading, and he was blown away. But then the next time I went to see him, he sat down and he said, "So I thought about what happened, and there's no possible way that that was possible. And so I'm just going to disregard that as not being able to explain it."
mm,
And I was just like, "Oh, all right. Well, moving on." But
mm-hmm.
I'm curious what you're noticing moving, like as you're testing this, what are you getting?
I mean, this sort of came from really people asking for it more than me creating it. And it was like this kind of last rendition in my head uh, came from me saying, like, I kept saying, like, what does this need to look like? What does this need to look like? And I couldn't get clarity on it. It was like I was really trying to like squish my way into it. Um, and then, I mean, I don't know yet how it's going to be received, but I do
Okay.
anticipate that just given how many people have asked for it, and when I have kind of tested it with other friends of mine who are also clinicians in the spiritual space, ish. Like, I don't know that anybody has fully kind of said, like, I'm owning. I mean, there are a few people out there who are mediums, but who also
Mhm.
do therapy. Um, but I do feel like there's like a hunger for it. And I think we talk in our space about like trauma informed in the therapy space, you know, there's trauma informed therapists. And um, I've always had a little bit of an issue with that because I feel like all therapists should be trauma informed because you're dealing with
Mhm.
people and people have, and life is, can be really hard and traumatic. And,
Yeah.
um, but I'm really looking at that as like, can we have more spiritually informed clinicians who, when they do have these experiences that maybe they don't understand or they can't explain, that there is a space. I've had a lot of people say, like, I wish I had a space where I could talk with other clinicians about, you know, clients who are coming in and sharing that they did have a medium reading or their loved one did pass and suddenly they're having these experiences where their loved one is coming to them, bringing them messages. This is not psychosis. There's a
Mhm.
difference. And one of the things that we talk about in psychology is spiritual emergence versus spiritual emergencies. And that like these are experiences of spiritual emergence. And there's great work happening at Yale and the COPE project where they're looking at mediums and psychosis and like where is that line? Where's the difference between what is psychosis, what is hallucinations and delusions that are um God, I'm not going to be able to retrieve this word right now in my perimenopause brain. Um,
That's okay.
um, ego dystonic. There it is. Ego dystonic, which means it doesn't feel aligned, right? Like when you hear spirit guides, you're like, okay. But like when people who are psychotic hear these voices, hear voices, typically they are not, they don't feel good. Right? They
Mm.
feel it's called ego dystonic. And so, y- but lots of people are having these openings, these experiences where they are hearing that. And as clinicians, I think we're doing a disservice to our patients if we're shutting down those conversations because we don't believe it. We don't think it's real. I mean, even if you don't think it's real, I think there's still a place where you can unpack that. And
Mhm.
I do feel like for so long, I felt like I really didn't know where I fit in this space. I've really felt like, who am I in this space? I'm not a grief therapist. I don't want to be specifically a grief therapist. I'm not a straight up medium. I have these intuitive abilities, but like that does, it's like the book, Are You My Mother? I always talk about. Do you remember that Dr. Seuss book?
Yes. Yes, actually.
Where he like the
Yeah.
little bird goes around and like everything he thinks kind of looks like him
Yeah.
is his mother, and it's like not, bulldozer's not his mother, and like a
Right.
tractor truck isn't, and a crane isn't his mother. That's how I felt over the past, really, probably my whole, honestly, my whole life. I've always felt like I'm
Mhm.
not really sure where I fit in. Um, but this really has felt like, oh, this is where I live.
Yeah.
I live in this space between, in this
Yes.
space of, I'm not a medium. I'm not a grief specialist. I'm not a death doula. I'm not a like end of life care person. So where does that leave me? And this is where I finally feel like, oh, this feels home. This feels like home
Mm.
to me.
That's fantastic. That's when you know it's like full on alignment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everything you've been doing and all of the pieces you picked up have brought you to this point to be a wealth of information in what you're bridging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is so exciting.
It's so exciting. Even as I'm talking about it, I'm like, oh my God, like I feel like I could explode. Like
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see too how it's going to unfold, like
Mhm.
the clarity around it and what it's going to look like. And I think there's a lot of things I'm just trusting, like I don't know. But when I had this divine intervention moment just a couple of days ago where everything looked so clear to me, I was like, it was another invitation back into the trust.
Mhm.
Like, okay, just keep trusting because I think so often, and I've reached out to you to like help me on this sometimes. Like, help me just like I feel like I'm not getting information or I feel like the information isn't coming through. And this was such a reminder of like just trust that
Mhm.
when the information needs to come through in the right time, it will.
Yeah.
And until then, you can like muscle and try to make it work, but it's never going to feel the way it's going to feel when it comes through as clearly as it came through
Yeah.
last week.
Absolutely.
It was like midnight and I was like, oh my God, I gotta get
Oh,
like, I can't go to sleep.
amazing.
I gotta like write all this down and get it all. And then the next day too, I get like a lot of information in the shower.
Oh my
And
God, me too.
so
Absolutely. It's the best place.
the best, except that I don't have anywhere to write
I
it
know,
down.
right?
And I'm like, do I get out of the shower? I
Yeah.
don't want to get out of the shower. I want to stay in the shower because
Yeah.
I'm like, it's coming through and I hope I remember it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so much gets downloaded to me in the shower.
Mm.
Like even I'm working on a book right now and I have someone who's kind of helping guide me. And she said to me the other day, she goes, go in the shower, go sit in the shower and see what
Yep.
comes. And like, sure enough, last night, boom, 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 like more
Yep.
information just coming in. So
That's so fun.
yeah.
I love it. I swear water is like a conduit for not only energy, but consciousness.
Hmm.
Water is just so much more magical than we realize.
Yeah. I mean, this summer, I'm not typically someone who's like channeling quickly information. And this summer, I just kept hearing, I took a sabbatical. I was telling you, you actually predicted this, I think.
Hmm.
Like you, like
So
two
wild.
years ago, said something to me like, I mean, I went back and saw it in the email. I think I sent it to you. Like, you're gonna I think you're working on a book and you're gonna be taking some time off. And I was like, nah, no. And sure enough, like,
Yeah.
I went back and saw it and I think I was going through old emails or something
Yeah.
looking up to send you something and there it was. And it was great because I was really able to like tune in a way that I sometimes feel like in everyday life I just can't. Like it's hard for me to really find that space and time. And I kept hearing like go get on your board, go get on your paddle board and go out into the water and just go sit. Just go sit. And it was
Mhm.
like this push, push, push. So finally, one day when I had the time to do it, I went out and I was paddling, paddling, paddling. And then I heard, like, just sit down and just sit, like, just be still. And all of the sudden, information was like, I was talking to myself. I probably would have looked crazy if I was closer to shore and people could have seen me. I don't even remember at this point what exactly came through, but it was coming in a mile a minute. And
Mhm.
it did not feel like my voice. It felt clearly like other information was just coming through. And it was like I needed to be completely as almost completely immersed as I could be. I mean, my legs were in the water, but I was sitting on the board. And it was just like, where is this coming from?
Yeah. Those magic, moments of flow, like divine flow. Ah, those are just you can never fully explain it, right? Like you
No.
just
Mm-mm.
can't. Yeah.
Mm-mm. And they're so
Ah,
fun and they like are such a reminder of like
yeah.
the magic of this work and how and again for me it doesn't feel as accessible as I know it is for you and that's something that I've certainly struggled with is like accepting that this is just how I get information
Mhm.
um and that there are going to be times in my life where it just feels more accessible to me. And certainly when I'm on sabbatical by myself, my kids are away at camp, my husband's working, and I'm not.
Yes.
Not hard to get in touch with that experience. So it was a really an amazing gift. And even in talking about it right now, it's just a reminder to me that it's there.
Mhm. That's great. I just feel so much positivity behind this alignment for you moving forward. And I'm excited that this is coming up in your profession because that just speaks to what is surfacing in many other professions too, right? Of higher consciousness. And if we're really going
Hmm.
to break into a concept of spiritual health being mental health and have it be really real, that just shows how much humanity as a whole has been raising their consciousness. And the fact that people are asking means they're ready for it.
Hmm.
It's a
Hmm.
beautiful realization right now. So I'm so glad we're talking about this as we step into 2025.
Yeah, and I think we're
Great.
still seeing that like push pull, a little bit of that resistance too, of like maybe even that fear. Like I'm just thinking about a lot of the psychedelic work and how here it did not, the big psychedelic studies didn't get approved. And it's like there's still, I think, a
Mm.
lot of fear around expansive states of consciousness and what it could mean for humanity. I think it's amazing, but I think people fear it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. But it's also like the next frontier, right?
Oh,
It's just
for
this
sure.
for people to be able to reach consciousness themselves. And I see it kind of like, if I use a very general description, but like before within certain religions, you would go see a minister or a priest because they were there, your connection to source, to God. So you had to
Mm-hmm.
speak to the priest because you couldn't do it yourself. Then people came to realize, oh, they can do it themselves. They can have that connection themselves. And I think this expansion into consciousness now is not just for psychedelics only. It's not just for mediums or channelers or conduits. Like it's for everyone. And we're all going to start having more experiences, some bigger, some smaller, of expanded consciousness or flow
Mm-hmm.
state experiences or divine downloads, like you were talking about. I think this is something I know from my guides. They've been wanting to bring in clearer communication and connection with people.
Mm.
So I just think there's so many neat alignments again that this is coming forward now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I think we could all agree that it's so needed now. Like there has to be.
Yeah.
It
A
feels,
change.
it, yeah, it feels like, and I've said this for a while, like I've felt like there's a precipice moment, but like this feels like a precipice moment. Like
Hmm. I
it
agree.
feels like a tipping point.
Yeah.
And I think we're gonna tip in the best way possible.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so
Is
happy to
that
hear
what
that.
your guides say to you? Maybe I don't think we're gonna tip. Maybe they think we're gonna tip and they're coming through me.
No, absolutely. I've been getting that from them consistently that we are like, we're making big changes. And sometimes we can look out in the collective and think there's no way, but we actually are. Things are transforming amazingly underneath, and it is creating these tipping points. So I think you're right on
Mhm.
cue. I
And
really do.
so much is being shown. So much that's been beneath the surface is now coming to the surface. And I think it's important that we like look at that and look at the meaning behind it and what it means is for us as humanity in humanity
Mm-hmm.
in terms
Absolutely.
of like how are we going to continue to better humanity.
I love that. So, with all of that being said, how can people reach you or connect with you or follow you? Where are the best places to find you?
I am on Instagram mostly at Dr. Amy Robbins, but also my podcast, Life, Death, and the Space Between, which you have been on. I
Such
think
a
I
good
think you might
podcast.
I think you might be getting ready to get your like Saturday Night Live jacket on my show. Do you
Oh,
watch Saturday Night Live?
yes,
When they've been
I
on
do.
5 times, like they get
Oh,
a
that's
jacket.
awesome. That's
I think
funny.
if when I have you on again, that will be three, which might be my
Three.
most. You and Paul Selig might be my top two most
Oh,
visited guests.
I love it.
Um,
I'm honored. Very
yeah,
honored.
and I
Yeah.
always love having you on and love our conversations because I
Yeah.
think you do such a beautiful job of really expressing how this work works in a very tangible, like very non-ego driven
Mm.
way, and it's so
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, YouTube. I know
Okay.
a lot of your people watch you on YouTube, so you can
Yep.
watch me on YouTube too.
Hey.
Dr. Amy Robbins, I think there it's just Dr. Amy Robbins, but Life, Death, and the Space Between, any of those, my website. I have a course that is not for clinicians yet. I need to take another sabbatical, I think, to get my clinicians course out. But um, my course, Live Your Life Backwards, I just finished my first cohort and it was
Nice.
amazing. It is I incorporate it. It is about using kind of this lens of death and spirituality to tap into the essence of your soul. So really doing it's deep work. I think people were like, this is more than I thought it was going to be, but in the best way possible. And we talk
Yeah.
about meditation and grounding and signs and connecting to spirit guides and past lives and between lives and like
That's
I put a
fantastic.
lot in this course. It's very, very dense. It's 8 weeks. Um, but it was just amazing to watch the transformation. The beginning, what felt like the beginning of real transformation for people, which
Mhm.
is the work that I love. It's why, I'm doing what I'm doing is I really want people to have the opportunity to transform and change their lives.
That's such a beautiful gift. Such a beautiful offering. And everything has
It's
led to it. So when
it's
does this
everything is led to it. Yeah.
yeah. And when does this course go live?
So, I'm gonna open up for a new cohort in January because
Okay.
I'm really kicking off this spiritual health, mental health thing.
Yes.
And it is a limited there's only a limited number of spots because I do group coaching with it. And so if it's just too
Yes.
big, then I feel like it loses a little bit of the
Yep.
magic.
Okay. Amazing. So I'm going to put the links to all of these in the description box below. So anyone watching or listening, it's all in there. Um, any closing thoughts before we go? Anything you want to leave everyone with as we close
Oh,
out this year?
closing thoughts. Um, I feel like get ready.
Mm,
Like
I like
just
that.
be ready for it. Like it's all and don't be afraid. I
Mhm.
think, there's so much fear and it's so easy to get embroiled, like to get sucked into the fear.
Mhm.
And I think that when you can step out of the fear, there are amazing things. There's hard things happening and there's beautiful things happening.
Mhm. I love that. All right. Well, with everything we covered today, thank you so much for sharing this
Thank
beautiful
you, Jeanette.
like new energies, new ideas. Gosh, it just makes my heart is totally lit up with all of this. So I can't thank you enough. And to all of you listening and watching, thank you so much as always for joining the show. I sure appreciate you. And I'll be back again next week.